Well, first off, I'm just so happy to be here, and I want to thank Joe very much indeed for inviting me. It was only 2 weeks ago that we met at IMARC 2015, and I began to talk about the kinds of things that I do. I'm a colleague of Steve Ender's, and he said, come and chat to this group. So thank you. It's wonderful to be here. So, a bit about my background. I'm Cliff Saunders. I'm an electrical engineer originally, an industrial psychologist, cybernetician, and now a neuroplastician. And by the time the talk is over, you'll know what a neuroplastician is. I've worked in lots of different industries. I started off in weapons delivery, in guided weapons of British Aircraft Corporation, and I worked for them for about 10 years. Went to Canada and worked for Bell Northern Research, Northern Telecom, for about 15 years, so I'm familiar with the high-tech work, the high-tech world of new product introduction, which is why I asked the question earlier of Daryl, which is how fast, what's the pulse rate of mining compared, let's say, to consumer electronics. I've done a lot of work in steel, and in 2004 I had my first foray into mining when I did a project for, it was then Inco, 2004. So I'm a relative newcomer to the industry. In that time I've worked for Kinross and Newmont, KGHM, Noront, Vale, and companies like that. So I take a very different view of mining than a lot of people do because I'm not from your industry. And let me just say, one of the quickest things you can do to learn a lot about a new way of thinking about your industry is to go to another industry and study it and see what problems they have had that they have solved in that industry, and see if you can steal those ideas and bring them into your own. So you'll see as you get to know me that I'll use that technique a lot and ask myself, are the answers to the questions that you've got actually have already been solved, or can you use them as a metaphor for yourself? I've now been in Australia for 9 months, and Jeff Wade, if you'd stand up for me, please. So this is Jeff Wade. He's one of my partners in the Center for Applied Neuroscience in Business. It's great to have Jeff here. He's our partner. He's an expert in neuro-linguistic programming, change management, all sorts of stuff. You really need to get to know Jeff. He understood about 3 years ago when he and I met on LinkedIn that what I was talking about around neuroscience was something that was important for Australia, bearing in mind 35% of your GDP is related to mining. And I'd also like my other colleague, Marcin Zimski from Dassel. He's going to come into the picture a little bit later on. And Gideon, I have a job for you, sir.
Please, how much?
Okay, because my talk is half an hour long and I've got to start at 20 minutes, there's a slide that's going to say, Cliff, what's coming next? Can you do that for me? You will?
Yes.
You promise? Thank you. All right, good man. All right. This is not the first time this talk has been given. Steve Enders gave this talk a while ago. Discovery, Innovation and Learning in the Mining Business, New Ways Forward for an Old Industry. That's our 2011 paper. And when we were getting ready to prepare this, fortunately, how many of you met Steve? He came to lunch. He just popped in. How many of you waved? Okay, so you know Steve. Steve used to be he's just amazing, right? It's so much fun having him as a colleague. When he looked at what we wrote back in 2011, I could tell that he looked at the world from a very different way that I look at it. I mean, he's an economic geologist. He's a geologist par excellence. He's what he calls a biggie boss. He looks at the business from many, many different perspectives. And we asked ourselves, what's the same and what's different from the past 4 years since we published our SEG paper? And Steve said, in his view, the most important change is a profound 4-year downturn in the metal cycle, a significant loss of credibility in the majors, a loss of belief in the juniors, and he asks the question, is this structural or cyclic? So that's what Steve saw as different when we were sort of revising this presentation earlier in the week. And when I look at what's the same and what's different in mining over the past 4 years, and in fact for the past 10 or 11 years since I came into mining, I come back to this boat. How many of you know what the name of this ship is? What do you notice about it? It's rather odd. What is it?
A lot of sails.
A lot of sails. This is the Thomas Lawson. Thomas Lawson was built in 1902 as the last ditch stand against the evil empire of steamships, and they thought if we add another mast, it'll go faster and we'll be able to destroy them, we'll be able to defeat them. Any idea what happened to it? It couldn't tack. And it actually hit the Scilly Isles during the storm, all hands lost by the skipper and the cook. And I just get that feeling that mining needs some new ideas. It just needs some new ideas, and hopefully I'm going to be able to show you some new ideas today. In my view, what's needed is a metaphor. Just as as we've been seeing, there's a need to go from the sailing ship metaphor to the steamship metaphor. I was talking to Donovan Waller at IMARC with Marston the other day. He's one of the VPs of technology at Anglo American, and he said, you don't get to the light bulb by cost reducing the candle. And that is a beautiful, beautiful insight. That's exactly my view. All right. So I have a look for a leverage point within the system. So I'm a cybernetician, so I'm interested in complex systems, and most complex systems are messy, which means they interconnect and rework back into themselves, which means it's not obvious to know where to enter the system. And when I look at mining as a whole and I look at the challenges ahead of the business, I say that change management is broken. The theory of change management does not deliver what the promise is. And you can quibble about the numbers. Most people would say that the success rate is around the 30% mark. I talked to Robbie Lazar, who was COO of AngloGold Ashanti 2 or 3 years ago, and he said 90% of their change management initiatives failed. And that's a huge loss, a huge cost. I went to the CRC conference about a month and a half ago, and in talking to people, the theme came up time and time again. Yes, we have a great innovation, but getting the adoption is the difficulty. And so let's see if we can take a crack at that. And I haven't done, so the pulse rate idea is really interesting to me. When I look at mining, and being an industrial psychologist, I have some cognitive probes that I use to see if I can figure out where companies are in adoption cycle. I can tell you that mining is probably the laggard of technology adoptions. It's extraordinarily slow, and there's all sorts of excuses and reasons. But basically, I think is that you haven't been, I say you, we, I'm a miner now, 11 years in, we need a different way of thinking about things. And in my view, what you need is a new mindset. And you need some new science. And you need to think about yourselves in a different kind of way. Because the model about our minds up until very recently has been that you are stuck. That I am stuck, that we are stuck. Because there's been a model for many, many years, certainly from the 50s, that you're born with a genetic predisposition for whatever it is, you peak in power at around the age of 22 and 23, and there's a long, slow decline after that, especially cognitively. It isn't true. A lot of work has been done in the past, since the 70s, on neural connectivity and how brains actually work, and it turns out that that's a lie. If this field is new to you, here are some primers for you. I think the best book you can get, bar none, to introduce yourself to this idea that you're actually wearing plastique rather than rocks is The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Deutsch. It's absolutely 2007 book. It reprises a lot of the research being done from the 70s and gives about a dozen different case studies of how the accelerated use of neural connections can be applied throughout many different situations, most of them in that case clinical. That's a great book to get. Next book to get would be The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. I've got a copy of it on my desk. It is a wonderful story, a journey of a woman who was born with 3 congenital defects in her brain, Barbara Arrowsmith, and she was so determined and she was so bloody minded, she's a Canadian woman. What she did was she was able, by the age of 27, to debug the specific neural networks that were creating her disorientation and an inability to understand prose. She gave herself exercises to do where she was able to regrow connections that she had never had since she was born. It's an absolutely fabulous story. It's also a good book to get because it's going to give you a roadmap for how your brain actually functions at a high level. Your Aussies. How many of you have seen this by Todd Sampson? Good man. Those of you who have not, please do it. Redesign My Brain by Todd Sampson. So he's a Canadian-Australian, and he's had a number of programs on ABC, you might want to pass that around, and he shows how an ordinary person, I know he's an extraordinary person, but he's really an ordinary person, is using neuroplasticity to redesign his own brain, to function better. And then the other piece that I'd recommend that you get and have a look at would be our SEG paper, and if you'd like a copy of it, I will send it to you. So these are primers on this amazing capacity we have of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity. How big is this effect? Are you ready to disbelieve something? Yes, remind us. Your brain has the capacity to reorganize itself, to reconceptualize itself, as if it had been exposed to 2 years' worth of business knowledge in 2 days. Your plastic ability of your brain is that vast. It is as if you can begin to see things that you had never seen before. Another way to think about it in mining terms would be twice the throughput at half the cost, a 400% improvement, if you like, in your ability to see things or perceive or deal with situations. It is a huge effect. And I guess the question is, why hasn't it really been discovered before? It's because the mental models that scientists had predisposed them not to look at the brain in a certain kind of way. So experiments were done that confirmed the fact that the brain was stuck. But as soon as the idea came that maybe an enriched environment would create more dendrites, that began to break open this whole idea. So you are wearing a huge piece of capability in the back of your head, in your head. How many of you would like to learn how to mobilize and use that, just as a rough thought? 6 of you. No. Just kidding. This is Brian. Say hello to Brian. Hello, Brian. This is Brian. All right. Hello, Brian. So, this is my right hemisphere. You're going to have to learn brain science. This is one of the things that miners are going to have to learn to do. But I don't want to learn brain science, or I learn comminution, so you got to learn some more. So we have two hemispheres. Each hemisphere is made up of 4 lobes. The frontal lobe, where we decide things and make things happen. The visual cortex at the back, where we see things and make sense in a social environment of the things that we're seeing. Our temporal lobes, where we hear things, and our parietal lobes, where we feel things. Pretty straightforward, 4 lobes. So when we say that we know something or believe something, let's say, for example, just humanly, just tap the top of your head for me for a moment, if you would. Okay? Now, it's pretty remarkable what you have just done. Thank you. You have listened to what I've said, and you have decoded my words and come up with a procedure to actually tap the very neurons that are doing the tapping. You're tapping your own neurons when you do that. For you to be able to know the procedure to do that, you have to go into this brown part here. It's called the premotor cortex. It's where all our beliefs and all our knowledge of procedures live. So when we talk about resistance, people say, oh, they resist change. What we're really saying is the neurons for a procedure that we want to learn how to use is going to conflict with neurons that are already busy doing another job. It is not true that we only use 5 or 10% of our brain. We use all of it all of the time. There are no neurons sitting around with their thumbs up their backside going, I think I'll go for coffee. They're all busy, but they may be busy doing things that are now out of date. So the question is, how do you get information into that particular piece of meat? One of the things that you can look at in change management and begin to see almost immediately is that a lot of the work of change management, and I've done a lot of it, so I'm guilty too, is that the ideas are presented to the auditory cortex in the left hemisphere and just this back part called Wernicke's area. So you fill up your brain with lexical items and words that have no relationship with the premotor cortex. So you've got to find a way to talk to the language of the premotor cortex. And let me show you how that is done. This is a case study. So I've been interested in change for a long time, long time. And I found that my results up until about 12, 13, 14 years ago were pretty much the same as everyone else. You go through a complex facilitation, you get action items, you'd assume that people are now actually going to do things that they said they were going to do, and you go back 90 days later and nothing's really happened. When my wife and I were down in San Diego about 15 years ago now, maybe 16 years ago, we met a group out of UCSD who are neurophysiologists interested in applying neurophysiology to business. And I looked at some of the work that they had done, and I want you just to, I'm not going to do into all of the detail, I want you to notice the highlights. This particular case study is about a foundry in Kentucky that was going out of business. It was owned. The assets were now owned by the bank, and they were in receivership, and it was going downhill fast. They were just going to sell all the bits for what they could get for it. Management had heard about the group at UCSD and said, "Can you help?" So the first thing those neuroscientists do is they go into the real physical world, and you can see the activities. Here's some of the molds being used. Here's another big mold. There they are casting. There's one of the products. They look at the work practice, the culture of practice. How does work get done? Where do things go? They also do some fancy work in cognitive probes to get a sense of what's going on inside each person's brain, to get an idea of what the competing mental models are. And then what they do is they build an emulation. They scale all of the important constraints in the real physical world into small models. So here you can see is a small model. It's about 2 or 3 inches in size. And rather than using steel or bronze, then they put plaster of Paris in. So you can begin to create a product, but now much smaller and more tractable. Next thing they do is they look at the data and they make sure that they understand what the data is, the order processing. And essentially, they build a miniature foundry, but on a desktop in a conference room. And they force the employees and management to go through an emulation of work in sped up time. In other words, they will take the activities that you would do in a month as a group and scale them in a representative way so that those activities can be performed in, let's say, 20 minutes. So on day 1, all of these poor devils are bought in, and they're told to get themselves out of bankruptcy, buy yourselves back from the bank, whatever the non-negotiable goal is. And as a cohort, they fall immediately into the traps, or they begin to perform as if they were back at work. The environment sufficiently veridical, looks real enough, that they suspend disbelief and they go, oh yeah, I'm at work. And immediately produce the results that they had been doing, in other words, losing money. They're given a lot of granular data so they know how they're doing, and every 20 minutes on day one, they fail, and 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 they fail. And by the end of an 8-hour day, 3/8 of 24, that's 2 years worth of business, they have managed to fail in the way that they have been failing up until that point. Then they fall asleep, to go to bed that night. During the night, the brain begins to reorganize itself so that when they come back the next day and they play the game again, a lot of us have had that experience where you've woken up in the middle of the night with the answer to a knotty problem. They then go on to achieve the goal. They achieve the goal on the second day because now the brain has reorganized itself. This is the group of people, of managers, on the day after the event. They were looking to see how they're going to use the learnings from the emulation, put them into real life. They went on to do a management buyout. They bought the company back from the bank. They made it profitable, and then they went on and bought another failing foundry, also in Kentucky, and turned that around as well. So that got my attention. That piece of work, by the way, was done about 25 years ago and had been funded by the National Science Foundation of the US. So that's the basic idea. So let's look at some of the piece parts for it. The first one I've already hinted at is this idea of a non-negotiable goal. If you want to activate that neuroplastic capacity that you have, and you were a lazy person. How many Americans here? How many Americans have I got? I know Steve's gone home. Okay, I'm an American. I like Americans. So they say, okay, Cliff, what is the one thing? I don't have time for all that stuff. What's the one thing that if I was to learn it, I could get on the on-ramp? And the answer is the non-negotiable goal. The non-negotiable goal, when you embrace it, will begin to change your brain and how you think about it. Now, Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. A non-negotiable goal is not the kind of goal that you hope you're going to get. Well, I hope I'm going to get it. Yeah, but you really get it if we get... No, it's a goal that you're actually going to achieve. The best definition, it's a bit grisly, of a non-negotiable goal, in World War I and World War II, there are a number of cases where a squaddy was disemboweled with a piece of shrapnel, but he didn't kill him. And he somehow or other had the wherewithal to pick up his entrails and trudge a mile and a half to the medic's tent before fainting. And when he was interviewed later after he'd recovered, he said, no, I couldn't stop and I had to keep going. His mind, his brain knew what the non-negotiable goal was. We're coming up to Christmas. Christmas is a non-negotiable goal if you're a toy manufacturer. There is no one to call. Hey, Chuck, yeah, no, it's Cliff down here at Dinky. Now, could you move Christmas back by could you do that? A couple of weeks? That'll be fine. Oh, that'll be great. Who do you call to move Christmas? You can't. It's a hard stop. It's a non-negotiable goal. So, and of course, Tom Hanks' movie, Houston, we have a problem. Right? Apollo 13, when something happens in the spaceship. So the first thing that you want is a non-negotiable goal that you can embrace. And the thing that you'll discover is you want to start to think like Google. Google exhorts its employees to think on the 10 times, an order of magnitude. When you give people permission to think in an order of magnitude, now you begin to break all the architectural constraints that have kept you hamstrung because of your legacy systems. If you say, well, it's going to be an order of magnitude, you get things like self-driving cars, Google Earth. So that's the first component that you need. The next thing you want to do is to feed Brian a lot of information very, very quickly in a procedural form that he can understand. And the way we talk about that is iterations with feedback. Lots and lots. New product introduction. Fail fast, fail often, fail cheap. Fail fast, fail often, fail cheap. Get good at fast prototyping. Hurt yourself with it. Just practice very, very quickly. And so what we want to do is present the brain with so much feedback that it actually triggers a sort of a little crisis inside the brain itself. I like this one. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that a light bulb won't work. He never gave up. What would have happened if it stopped at 999 or 9,000, whatever it was? Another component of this type of technique that will release this neuroplasticity that we have, surprisingly, is fear. Most of us don't like fear. We're not trained to like it. When we sense it, we generally avoid it, or we'll block the kinesthetic, we'll block the feeling. But fear is a friend. If you're born without a fear sensation, and some people are, they're generally dead in their early 20s. Why? Because you cannot judge something that's dangerous. There was a story about 3 or 4 years ago of a woman who was born without a fear response. She put a hand into an aquarium full of dangerous spiders and they stung her to death. She didn't have a response to fear. So we need fear. But we don't want so much fear in these types of emulation games that we trigger an amygdala response, a fight or flight response. Because once the brain is in a sort of a panic mode, then it's not set itself up to learn anything new. But if you can put the brain under a certain amount of pressure, increase its arousal level so it is definitely alert, definitely moving into action, you can then anchor, which is an NLP term for getting a trigger. You can use the fear as a trigger response later on when you're back at work, and you now have access to the information that you learned in this environment. Incidentally, most change management exercises are done in conference rooms or meeting rooms, which does not increase the arousal level of the brain. So it means that when you're in a complex situation at work, you don't have access to that information. If you've learned the information under an enhanced emotional state, you have access to it when you need it. It's called state-dependent learning. So you want to be able to utilize fear. I've already mentioned it. This is another big component of being able to utilize this plasticity that we have in our brain is sleep. Once you have set the brain a knotty problem that it doesn't know how to solve and it wants to solve it, as you sleep, what will happen is the brain will begin to query both of the hemispheres about what each hemisphere has observed. And remember, really, we're Siamese twins. We carry two personalities around in ourselves. Each hemisphere, if we were to cut the corpus callosum, is a different individual. Now, these two individuals talk to one another, and through that process, they begin to question the patterns that are coded in the premotor cortex. Okay? So they're the four main components of building one of these neuroplastic emulations. This next case study, you see I'm ranging across industries, stealing from one industry to help you with your other. So transportation, this work was done about 20 years ago. New York City Transit wanted to put in a computerized maintenance management system, and it had not been done successfully before. Why? Because the hourly paid workers always felt like they were being talked down to and demeaned because they're not good at classroom training, and most of the computer training was done in the classrooms, not classroom learners. So they start sabotaging the kit. The unions didn't like computerized systems because they thought they were Trojan horses for time and motion studies, so again they would sabotage it. So management at New York City Transport was quite concerned, and they turned to a sort of industrial group at New York University and said, can you use some of these techniques we're hearing about in transportation? So again, please notice the pattern. They went into the real physical world and looked at real subway barns, including the major pieces of information that are used as cues for next pieces of work. It turns out that that yellow and red strip is extremely important if you're a maintenance guy at New York City Transit. And then what they did was they then built a subway barn. And you see the little, again, the yellow and red stripe, you can see the rolling stock. And here is the emulated computerized maintenance system that they're going to have to work through. The non-negotiable goal was to make money, was to improve first pass yield, to use the computer system well to be able to manage information of a particular piece of rolling stock as it went through its life cycle. Same type of thing happened. They went into automatic. They did 19 different depots. So this was a huge piece of work. Happened exactly the same way every time. The first day of the cohort, they go into automatic. They fail because they're using procedures that they know ought to work, and they lose money, and they don't have a good rate of repair, and they're not using the tools properly. They sleep, they come back the next day, and then they ace the game. The most important slide for me is this one here. These guys were from different departments, and the day before, just the day before, they wouldn't have sat next to each other because, well, they're from that department and I'm from this department. So you've got siloification. Silos weren't talking. At the end of the game, they're focused on the non-negotiable goal as a tertiary object, an object out there, and now the politics are aimed towards the real goal. They went on to get off vendor support in 2 weeks for the hourly paid workers, which is a record. The foremen were off vendor support in 6 weeks. They have to do more. Bear in mind, most of these vendor support contracts last for a year and a half. So they were off vendor support in record time. Much better first pass yield. They ended up putting $40 million, saving New York City Transit $40 million, and it has a huge ROI. So that's an example from transportation. You can see now why my mind is going, well, I wonder if we can do that in mining. So in 2005, when Ty Burt took over from Bob Buchan at Kinross, he asked me to come in and look at the different technologies that were available to begin to retool Kinross. And if you know anything about Kinross, back in 2005, it was really the bottom end of the tier. It was a bottom player. Wasn't considered to be a good operator, wasn't considered to be making the best of what little that they had. And the non-negotiable goal that we asked Ty, well, what do you want, Ty? What do you want the non-negotiable goal for your team to be? He said, come on, let's go. I want to double the market cap in 18 months. So what we did was we looked at the real world. There's an open pit gold mine. I think it's up in Timmins. Here's the truck. Here's the shovels. Here's the mill. And here's the open pit gold mine. It was we made loads of these. We had 20 inches by 20 inches by 10 inches, and we were able to instantiate the block model by using little clay models with gold BBs, magnetic gold BBs buried inside. So what the team had to do, they had to make production, they had to manage maintenance, there were environmental issues, there was greenfield and brownfield exploration, and since every 20 minutes was a month, it meant on the hour, every hour, Ty wanted to have a board meeting to see how well we were doing. We had all of the mine managers, their right-hand men, all of the major corporate functions, and we did an analysis of the social structure of Kinross, and we found some of those individuals who might not be high up in the hierarchy, but are highly connected. You know, those kinds of people. You know, if there's a problem, we're going to go and talk to Mike, because Mike knows everything. So we got all the Mikes and all of these individuals, and we put them through it. Sure enough, day one, they worked really hard. They wanted to defeat me. It was not much fun. They worked very, very hard, but they worked hard within their silos. They never got the cross-silo advantages that they could have done. They went to bed that night, they came up the next day, and in order to make the game more difficult, and I don't want to get off on a sidetrack with the difference between a simulation and an emulation. Just in brief, what you don't want to do is allow people to learn the game. You want them to be able to, their brains to learn the principles. So we sped time up. Now a month was 15 minutes, and we, rather than having the gold price slightly going up, we made it drop. At the you can see down here, they had doubled their market cap within 18 months. I know they had a tailwind from the commodity price, but when you look at the change in market capitalization with their peers, they were one of the top in that time period. Of course, nothing lasts forever, and I think there's a case for going back in, but this was the first time that we had done a mining business emulation anywhere in the world. It was our first one in Canada. From that, I met Steve Enders in 2007, I think it was, and I asked Steve, is this kind of thing interesting to you? He said, well, I really don't know, it's got to move the needle. How many of you know Greg Hall, the Australian explorer? All right. When I joined Kinross, Greg was still Group Vice President Exploration for Placer, and he took a shine to me because he knew I was from outside the industry, and he gave me the ESSO paper. The ESSO paper was published in 1989. It documented a 5-year experiment by the ESSO board that back in 1985 they spun out of the corporate beast a junior with the same mandate as their corporate brethren: find as much profitable oil and gas as you can. At the end of the 5 years, they audited the two groups. You ready for a shock? The small group found 2.8 times the bookable barrels of the corporate group at half the cost. Do the math. 560% over industry best practice. You can't, that requires an architectural change of mind to be able to do that in detail. Now, how many of you have read that paper? A few of you have. Those of you, if you're interested in it, let me know and I'll send you a copy of it. So I just sent that to Steve and said, would that move the needle? And he said, let's do it. We would be crazy not to do it. So we did greenfield exploration. Here you can see a couple of districts that we modeled. Their equivalent on the right-hand side, the emulation, was a 4 foot by 4 foot by 1 foot box inside which we had buried a particular type of deposit. We had 6 of those boxes, at 12 altogether, 6 each day, and they had to find as much bookable material as they possibly could. Here's the real-world drill. Here's the game drill. You see that one's barren and that one's got ore in it. And the same thing that happens every time on day one, they go into automatic and they exhibit exactly the same behavior as a cohort that they do at work. It took them 3 hours to drill their first hole on day one. And this chap here, you can see how glum he is. He came up to me partway through the afternoon on day one and said, our stock price keeps going down. And I said, I know, it's because you haven't booked me. He said, I know. And he went away. It was poignant. You can hear, you can see more plain. You may know that's Joe Rota there. Slept on it, came back the next day. We gave them an hour to get themselves organized. And within the first 15 minutes of the game starting, they had drilled their first hole. They did spectacularly well. They thought differently about expertise and how to rank. Some of the top right-hand corner is they took over a conference room next door so that they could have a war room of all of their deposits. And they were so good, by the afternoon of day 2, they were getting ready to go into production in one of the boxes. So there are 4 examples of an emulation environment that has the capacity to trigger this neuroplastic quality that we all have. Essentially, you sting the brain with failure. Fair failure. It's not like they were being asked to walk on water. These were possible, stretch, non-negotiable goals. So it's an intense experience. It's focused on a stretch, non-negotiable goal. And really what you're doing is you're rehearsing away the change management problem. You are focusing on the frontal lobe, not the auditory cortex. And you're doing it in a safe, fun way, so as you fail and you make mistakes, it really doesn't matter. There's no career-limiting aspect to it. As I say, fail often, fail cheap, fail fast. Gideon? What's next? Well, Gideon, thank you very much for that. So that's my first 20 minutes. I hope that's doing some. So now into question time. Well, I thought no one would ask. Thank you. You can see that all those things are handcrafted, right? I mean, there's a lot of handcrafted work, and unfortunately, by the time you finish, you've blown the emulation up and it's done. I mean, you've wrecked it. You've now got to go back and rebuild it again. It was obvious to me then that what we needed to do back in 2007 is begin to say, can we gamify this? Can we begin to use 3D videos to begin to build an environment that we could use over and over again? So I'm going to now show you a Dassault video. I want you to notice particularly how real it looks. This is a single-player game. This isn't a multiplayer game. It's designed to train. Notice how real everything looks. It's not difficult for your brain to see and believe that it would be at work. Here you're drawing a sample off. You're learning a procedure. All right. So this is a simulation rather than an emulation where we're adding skills. Notice that if you get close to it, you can actually feel like you're moving.
Clips. Just a quick comment.
Please.
This is not a video. I know it looks like it, you use the word. This is actually a virtual model of your facility. So each piece of equipment there has data associated to it, and it is a simulation. So you can actually walk through, you can select things with the mouse, and it'll have data associated with it. It is actually a virtual model of the platform.
Right. So, thank you. So Dassault has these tools, but they have them for oil and gas, geophysics, they got them for hearts, they got them for all sorts of things, but not yet in mining, or just starting. And my spec to them is, this is a multiplayer game. 7 people can play this game. It looks rough. That's why I showed you the Dassault video first. It wouldn't fool you very much, but it was designed for the Canadian Safety Roundtable that we presented back in 2008, and I wanted to see whether grown-up miners would actually play a video mining game. You couldn't get them off it. They wanted to do all sorts of things with it. So this was a proof of concept idea where you're taking, again, the real physical world, granular data. Every 20 minutes, granular data is presented to the players so they know how well they're doing. Here's a truck taking some ore up to the crusher, and if you look down in the pit, you'll see there's other things happening at the same time. But these chaps look like they're not paying close attention. It looks like they're falling a bit asleep, and someone's coming down the ramp. I hope they're really paying attention. It looks like they're going to go, oh my God, they're going to get dinged for that in this environment. So someone is actually playing that part as they take as they drive the truck up to the crusher. Making safe production, essentially, was the idea of the game. So that's what's coming next. The ability to take very highly realistic 3D virtual worlds for reusable mining environments where you can play simultaneously up to about 50 players and essentially take all of the problems, all of the difficulties that you have in terms of implementing stuff and now begin to rehearse your way into their use. How many of you know Dundee Precious Metals?
We need to be 2 minutes.
Okay. How many of you know the Chelopech Bulgarian gold mine story? Okay, twice the throughput at half the cost. They changed the metaphor of how they thought about the gold mine by taking the lid off.
So that's taking the lid off, that's the article. I saw something about
Yes.
it's in your article.
Yes, exactly. Taking the lid off. Imagine being able to do 2.8 times at half the cost routinely. Imagine being able to rehearse that. What about the 2.8 times the barrels of oil? Or anything really large here. How about late stage exploration through all of the games of the feasibility process into an actually operating mine? Anything at all, you can now begin to safely rehearse. So again, 2 to 3 day environment, focus on stretch goals, rehearse away the change management problem, begin to utilize the neuroplastic capability that your brain has. Thank you. Do I have time for one?
You can take one question.
I can take one question. How about a question for Dessel?
You say you have to be able to emulate. In other words, you have this thing that you cannot change. And you want to not simulate, but emulate.
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, if I said I want to emulate something, I'm not really, how realistic is it? Scalable?
It just needs to be realistic enough to respect the physical constraints of the world, on the one hand, and sufficiently veridical that your brain will go, oh yeah, I'm at work.
Okay.
So they're the two constraints. It's not a simulation, you're not adding a skill, you are allowing the brain to harvest knowledge that it's already got.
And it has to be scalable, a scalable process. In other words, if I have a toy like this, it has to behave the same way as the big thing?
Yes, it needs to be proportionate. In other words, the 20-inch gold mine is proportionately similar to a 1.5 kilometer gold mine.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.